for joining me in another episode of Paranormal XL podcast. I'm your host, Gigi, and we are continuing with Season 4, All Things Aliens. In this episode, I will be getting into the real Men in Black. I am not going to lie, I didn't expect to start digging as deep as I did. Once I started the research, it definitely turned into a rabbit hole, and here we are, having a whole episode on the topic instead of my original plan that was to just speak a few minutes on it on a different episode. So let's get started with some of the unexplainable events that M.I.B. was involved in. I know when I think of M.I.B. or Men in Black, my mind goes right to the movies to start. I mean, how cool would it be to have Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones knock on your door after seeing a spaceship? I mean, I'd probably invite them in for a cup of tea and have a nice little chat about the little green men. But the truth behind these stories is different from what we saw in the movies. So imagine yourself just minding your own business. You live out on a dirt road, have a little farm, town with, let's say, like 4,000 people. You know, everyone is a friend or family. You go out to feed your cattle at 9 p.m. and notice some strange lights in the sky over your field. I mean, obviously at first you'd be like, what the hell? But you stand there looking at it for a few minutes and it just zooms back up in the sky like straight up. So you go back in, tuck your family into bed, go to sleep, wake up in the morning to pounding on your door. Not this like little tiny knock like do like we normally do. Straight up open-handed smacks on your door like it's the police. You open it and see 3 tall, what appeared to be sharp-dressed men, black suits, white shirt with a tie, but something is off about their faces. Well, in some of the first recorded experiences, it was told that the men actually looked like something from not this planet. And how they came across, like, let them in your house or you're going to go with them, including your family. They seemed to use verbal intimidation, but in some of the accounts, it was said when the Men in Black left, these people would feel lightheaded, dizzy, sick, and with a horrible headache, as if they were also trying to intimidate via telepathically. So before we get into some of these widely known accounts, let's take a second and wrap our heads around the fact that the M.I.B. has been talked about as early as 1665. In the British Isles, September 4th, 1665, it is written that there were lights in the sky the night before, and the townspeople were questioned about these lights by 3 tall men dressed in all black. You may have heard the story of what they call Night of the Warlocks. That tells about this case. I just wanted to go over the fact that 358 years ago, it was actually documented that these people got questioned by the Men in Black. Anyway, I just think it's crazy, but what part of this whole season isn't crazy? So let's get into some of these accounts that I've been talking about that happened with the M.I.B. In 1947, off the coast of Maury Island in South Puget Sound, a man named Harold Dahl was out on his boat with his son Christopher, their dog, and 2 of his workers. Harold collected logs floating in the sound and resold them to lumber mills. According to Dahl, on June 21st at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 6 unidentified flying objects appeared in the sky above his boat. One of the saucers then exploded, and a metal substance started raining down from the sky, killing the family dog and burning Christopher's arm. How freaking sad. So there was a government report, and I do have a copy of that, and I'm going to read that right now. Senate Resolution 8648 by Senators Kaiser, Nelson, Palumbo, Hunt, Zeiger, McCoy, Conway, Rivers, Melosa, and Fain. Whereas, on June 21st, 1947, Tacoma resident Harold Dahl and his son allegedly sighted 6 flying discs over Puget Sound near Vashon Maury Island, an event now commonly known as the Maury Island Incident. And whereas on June 22, 1947, Mr. Dahl alleges he was warned not to talk about what he saw by a man dressed in a black suit. And whereas on June 24, 1947, pilot Kenneth Arnold alleges he saw 9 unidentified flying objects, UFOs, near Mount Rainier. And whereas these controversial sightings helped launch a pop culture phenomenon of UFO sightings across the United States during the summer of 1947, which became known as the Summer of the Saucers, and whereas on August 8, 1947, 2 weeks after the Washington sightings, a UFO is alleged to have crashed outside Roswell, New Mexico, and this alleged crash has since become the most well-known alleged UFO incident in history. And whereas on August 1, 1947, Army Air Corps intelligence officers Captain William L. Davidson and First Lieutenant Frank M. Brown, who interviewed Harold Dahl about his sighting lost their lives when the B-25 bomber they were piloting crashed outside of Kelso, Washington. And whereas, following the tragic deaths of Davison and Brown, Harold Dahl publicly claimed his sightings at Maury Island was a hoax. Whereas special agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation conducted an investigation of the deaths of Davison and Brown and ultimately concluded that Dahl did not recant his story, but that his claim of hoax was itself a fabrication to avoid further public attention and ridicule. And whereas the FBI's conclusion and Dahl's secret were sealed for 50 years, and whereas the Maury Island incident and its surrounding circumstances have made immeasurable contributions to Washington State's cultural heritage and to popular culture worldwide, including most recently the 2014 award-winning motion picture The Maury Island Incident and the 2015 web series The Maury Island Incident, produced in conjunction with the Washington Filmworks Innovation Lab and Motion Picture Competitiveness Program. And whereas on April 1st, 2017, the third annual Burn UFO Festival will be held in the newest hipster hangout of the downtown Old Buren, with wide community participation and good humor, and whereas on the 7th anniversary of the seminal UFO sighting events, the Washington State sightings should be recognized for both their prominence and the primacy in the modern era of UFO popular culture. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Washington State Senate paused to acknowledge the 17th anniversary of the June 21st, 1947 Maury Island incident. The 1947 Summer of the Saucers popular culture phenomenon launched worldwide by these controversial events. The first reference to the characters now popular known as Men in Black, and be it further resolved that the Washington State Senate recognized the honor, the heroism, and service of the Army Air Corps intelligence officers Captain William L. Davidson and First Lieutenant Frank M. Brown, who lost their lives following their investigation of the Maury Island incident when their airplane crashed outside of Kelso, Washington on August 1st, 1947. And be it further resolved that the copies of this resolution be immediately transmitted by the Secretary of the Senate to the Air Force Historical Research Agency, to the Vashon Maury Island Heritage Association, to the Des Moines Historical Society, to the Highland Historical Society, to the Buren Historical Society, to the Longview Kelso Historical Society, and to the Washington State Historical Museum. I, Hunter G. Goodman, Secretary of the Senate, do hereby certify that this is a true and correct copy of the Senate Resolution 8648, adopted by the Senate April 18, 2017. Hunter G. Goodman, Secretary of the Senate. So he even says in there that he thinks that Dahl took that back to, downplay it so he wasn't like in the people's eye and such like that. So that's something to think about as we go further into these. Okay, so let's move on to Albert Baker. He lived with his parents in the attic and turned that into his home base. So with that, what I mean is like his UFO home base. So we will just jump into part of his story, his UFO side of his story. Albert's unique appreciation for the supernatural coincided with all the UFO talk of well-publicized flying saucer sightings in the American West during the late 1940s, pushing Bender to form one of America's known UFO organizations. In 1952, the Park City resident organized the International Flying Saucer Bureau. World War I Air Force member, a CEO of Eastern Airlines, Eddie Rickenbacker, became an honorary member. Albert Einstein politely declined his invitation. That's kind of funny. The Bureau's 600 worldwide members, with Bender as president, were dedicated to furthering the study of these mysterious crafts. Its headquarters were located in Albert Bridgeport's home in the attic. One of the group's most enthusiastic members, Max Krengle, also worked as a timekeeper at Acme Shear. He served as IFSB vice president and assistant director. Krengle lived in Stratford. His home was in one of the lordship's new Cape Cod-style houses along Stratford Road between Heartland Street and Airway Drive. Shortly after its founding, the IFSB reached out to members around the world through a quarterly journal, Space Review. The newsletter shared stories of UFO sightings and offered theories about the origins of these seemingly inexplicable object. No sooner had Bender commenced the IFSB than odd occurrences plagued him in Bridgeport. Ill health, strange phone calls, and telepathic messages hounded this researcher. These events coincidentally mirrored an outbreak of UFO sightings over southern Connecticut. In addition, Albert felt as if he was being watched. November 1952, at a local movie theater, Bender realized a strange man with glowing eyes observing him, and while walking home along Main Street, Albert was shadowed. On a separate occasion, late one night on Broad Street, Bender reported he was telepathically hypnotized and levitated. But the worst phenomenon was the sickening odor filling his attic. The stench was burning sulfur. Albert blended his UFO research with mental telepathy to further his experiments. Bender prompted readers of Space Review with an audience request. Broadmoor Street home, Albert blended his UFO research with mental telepathy. To further his experiments, Bender prompted readers of Space Review with an audacious request. Memorize and silently recite on a particular day and time a form letter penned by Bender. Albert's goal was to connect with alien life via the simultaneous thought projection of hundreds of IFSB members. World Contact Day, or as Bender in the IFSB officially preferred, C Day, commenced at 6 o'clock in the evening on March 15th, 1953. The noble telepathic message opened with calling occupants of interplanetary craft that have been observing our planet Earth. We of IFSB wish to make contact with you. We are your friends. Just over 20 years later, the Canadian progressive rock band Klaatu incorporated Bender's words into a haunting anthem. Musical siblings and New Haven natives, the Carpenters, provided their own version of the Klaatu song. World Contact Day is still observed by UFO enthusiasts every March 15th. Bender's message did not go over well. His rooms continued to fill with the smell of sulfur, and he was telepathically ordered to cease delving into matters that were not his concern. A yellow mist gathered in the attic. Bender announced that the July issue of Space Review would hold a startling revelation. It never appeared to print. In July 1953, Albert Bender was visited at his home by three men. Bender stated all of them dressed in black clothes. They looked like clergymen, but wore hats similar to the Homebug style. The notorious Men in Black, always in threes, made it clear to Bender that he was immediately to halt all of his UFO work. They communicated telepathically, stopped publishing before departing. The M.I.B. confiscated copies of Space Review, and in their wake, a yellow fog materialized in the upstairs room 784 Broad Street. Again, the vile odor of sulfur wafted through the attic. Unnerved by their otherworldly presence, Albert shuddered that he was scared to death and was unable to eat for days. The 32-year-old timekeeper would be the recipient of repeated M.I.B. visits. Not surprisingly, Bender's paranormal experiences were reported in local newspapers. What might seem borrowed from the plot of a late-night horror movie, Bender's stories can easily be traced at one of his familiar haunts, the downtown Bridgeport Public Library. Bender's account of the threats from the Men in Black became evident when viewing old microfilm pages of the Bridgeport Sunday Herald. One of the Herald articles reported the story under the headline Mystery Visitors Halt Research. Bender is quoted that three men in dark suits flashed credentials showing them to be representatives of a higher authority, and they asked numerous questions about the IFSB. The Herald reporter, Lem McClellan, interpreted these visitors as government officials. It was only years later, when the passage of time apparently lessened his anxiety, that Bender explained that the M.I.B. were not of Earth. The telepathic messages, headaches, him being stalked, and of course the surreal warnings of authorities in black suits compelled Albert to shut down the International Flying Saucer Bureau. A year and a half after founding the IFSB, the final issue of Space Review was released in October 1953. It included a cryptic message and warning. The mystery of the flying saucers is no longer a mystery. The source is already known, but any information about this is being withheld by orders from a higher source. We would like to print the full story in Space Review, but because of the nature of the information, we have been advised in the negative. We advise those engaged in saucer work to be very cautious. In 1956, fellow IFSB member Gray Barker penned the book. They knew too much about flying saucers. In these pages, Barker details Albert's Bridgeport experiences and introduced the world to the phrase Men in Black. A decade after his own brush with aliens, Bender chronicled his strange personal story in a bizarre expose entitled Flying Saucers and the Three Men. Albert stressed how the dark-suited visitors were mind-manipulating silencers. Abandoning his forays into the supernatural and UFO research, Albert Bender departed Bridgeport and relocated to California 3 years after publishing his autobiography. Albert Bender passed away at the age of 94 on March 29, 2016. So he just passed away recently. Now, there was, when you go back and you read files and such that are on this guy, they tried to go back and make sure, he was sane and he didn't have any other underlying medical issues. Clearly, he didn't. He made it to 94. And, and he was fairly healthy for a 94-year-old. It's just age got him type of things. Sadly, the house on 784 Broad Street no longer stands. This home, where alien theorists believe beings from outer space made their presence known, needed to make room for a different sort of invasion. The urban renewal, where the new housing developments and such like we have now. So it actually, his home vanishes from the city directories in 1957. So it was it never existed. Pretty crazy. So we have obviously talked about MUFON before in this season. We'll probably talk about it a few more times just because that's the thing now. This was kind of the first MUFON, I guess, is how I put it in my head. So it went IFSB and then MUFON. But MUFON's everywhere, as we know. So if you watch the other episodes where we have the head president of the Michigan MUFON is on there. And then, of course, Mama Mary when she discusses the work that she does with MUFON. So my question is if we have any MUFON listeners in this season, my question to you guys is, do you have any M.I.B stories? Are they still around? Do they still, see people and whatnot? That is something I have been wanting to know since delving into all this. Is this that might be still around? So with that, we will take a quick break and we will return and finish out the episode.
Hi everyone, this is JJ, the co-founder of Good Pods. If you haven't heard of it yet, Good Pods is like Goodreads or Instagram, but for podcasts. It's new, it's social, it's different, and it's growing really fast. There are more than 2 million podcasts, and we know that it is impossible to figure out what to listen to. On Good Pods, you follow your friends and podcasters to see what they like. That is the #1 way to discover new shows and episodes. You can find Good Pods on the web or download the app. Happy listening!
And we are back, so let's just jump right back in. A grandson of a World War II vet came forward about his grandfather's story. So we're going to start it off with some of the records. August 5th, 1944, according to records released on August 5th, 2010, British wartime PM Winston Churchill banned the reporting for 50 years of an alleged UFO incident because of fears it could create mass panic. Reports given to Churchill claimed the incident involved a Royal Air Force reconnaissance plane returning from a mission in France or Germany toward the end of the Second World War. Allegedly, when flying over or near the English coastline, the aircraft was suddenly intercepted by a strange metallic object that matched its course and speed for a time before accelerating away and disappearing. The plane's crew were reported to have photographed the object, which they said had hovered noiselessly near the aircraft before moving off. According to the documents, details of the cover-up emerged when a man wrote to the government in 1999 seeking to find out more about the incident. He described how his grandfather, who served with the RAF in the Second World War, was present when Churchill and U.S. General Dwight Eisenhower discussed how to deal with the UFO encounter. The files came from more than 5,000 pages of UFO reports, letters, and drawings from the members of the public, as well as questions raised by members of the UK Parliament. So he also was recorded to say that some truths are so precious they must be protected by a bodyguard of lies. And then also the fear of mass panic because of the loss of faith in the church. If this was to get out, like these reports of the Air Force and such seeing these things. So, I mean, clearly a cover-up of some sort. There's just so much. So much. Now, in this next little bit that I have, so my notes are like all over the place because once I started, I ended up with like 13 pages of notes, but like I'm a messy note taker, so it's like blurbs here and there, and I was trying to put everything together and do more research as I was typing all my notes together, but I couldn't find much more than what I wrote down. So there was a man in the UK that actually had a picture, and then he was visited by the Men in Black, and so when he was taking this picture, he said he was walking in the woods, spotted this alien, and the alien made like a gesture for him to like go away, but obviously he followed, because why wouldn't you follow? That'd be intriguing, right? So he goes over the hill or whatever, follows this alien, then he sees the spacecraft. So he got like the picture and stuff like that, and then he also had a compass, so like he looked down at his compass. He always carried a compass. Back then it was one of those things, in case you get lost type of thing, blah blah blah. But when he looked down at his compass was like just going nuts in a circle. It just kept spinning and spinning. He gets a visit from the Men in Black, all these interviews and such like that, but the Men in Black demanded the photo. So he gave him the actual photo, and then they asked for the negative, and he said, well, I don't have that, which he actually gave it to somebody that he knew, a friend of his, to keep. So whoever that is, I'm not really for sure, but I just thought that was kind of a cool story where he was like, no, I don't have it. And they were like, well, we want it. And he was like, no. And yeah, all that fun stuff. Okay, let's jump into the Robinson panel and the Condon report. An American obsession with the UFO phenomenon was underway in the hot summer of 1952. A provocative series of radar and visual sightings occurred near National Airport in Washington, D.C. Although these events were attributed to the temperature inversions in the air over the city, not everyone was convinced by this explanation. Meanwhile, the number of the UFO reports had climbed to a record high. This led the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, to prompt the U.S. government to establish an expert panel of scientists to investigate the phenomena. The panel was headed by H.P. Robertson, a physicist at the California Institute of Technology in Pasadena, California. It also included other physicist, an astronomer, and a rocket engineer. The Robertson panel met for 3 days in 1953 and interviewed military officers and the head of the Project Blue Book. They also reviewed films and photographs of UFOs. Their conclusions were that 90% of the sightings could easily be random stuff in the sky and or the weather, or to such earthly objects as aircraft, balloons, birds, and searchlights. There was no obvious security threat, and there was no evidence to support the ETH. Parts of the panel's report were kept classified until 1979, and this long period of secrecy helped fuel suspicions of a government cover-up. A second committee was set up in 1966 at the request of the Air Force to review the most interesting material gathered by Project Blue Book. 2 years later, this committee, which made a detailed study of 59 UFO sightings, released its results as Scientific Study of Unidentified Flying Objects, also known as the Condon Project, named for Edward U. Condon, the physicist who headed the investigation. The Condon report was reviewed by a special committee of the National Academy of Sciences. A total of 37 scientists wrote chapters or parts of the chapters for the report, which covered investigations of the 59 UFO sightings in detail. Like the Robertson panel, the committee concluded that there was no evidence of anything other than commonplace phenomena in the reports and that UFOs did not warrant further investigation. This, together with a decline in sightings activity, led to the dismantling of Project Blue Book in 1969. For whatever reason, when I started getting into the paranormal stuff, I was like, I need to look into Project Blue Book and da-da-da. I watched some of the documentaries and stuff on that and seeing and watching and hearing some of these interviews that were conducted to these people that witnessed it. They were in the Air Force. They were up in the plane, riding side by side with these UFOs. It's if you haven't delved into it, do it at least a little bit and watch some of the interviews and such, because it'll probably change your mind, honestly. So, of course, the government states they don't know anything, of course, and obviously some of the called-in cases from all of these years have been debunked. Most of them have. Just your average Joe trying to get their 15 minutes of fame type of thing, which we know is a thing in the world that we live in, especially today. No, if you go digging more to find out about any of these topics, you're going to get lost for sure. So make sure that, you got everything else going, because you'll be in for weeks and weeks in the internet and then in books and newspapers and all. It's just craziness and never-ending pit. So now I question everything, really. Over the years, has the government been gearing us up for this type of thing with the UFO and aliens? So once it does happen, we aren't so freaked out, kind of slipping the facts in and such, on stories that we're sidetracked with. Like right now, everything with social media and stuff, and then every so often you'll find something in there. And probably 75%, if not more, of us just kind of scroll by because it's not something shiny. But they're literally telling us, are the Men men in black not from Earth? Is it the government? Is it both? Is it the aliens? Like, does the government, did they hire the aliens to do this? Like, my brain just goes up a million miles a minute. I can't even get words out half the time, as you guys know. To get all those questions answered at one time would be so overwhelming for the human brain, I think. I know it would be too much for me to wrap my head around. Do I think we're alone? Absolutely not. But I'm just not sure if I want to know what's out there, or what, or how long it's been there, or where it is, who or what. But we are just a small speck to something larger than our hearts and our minds could ever fathom. Which I know most of us know that, but at the same time we get so caught up in our daily stuff that we forget. There's a much bigger picture out there. There's space. There's infinity. We don't know what else is out there. It's just crazy, like I keep saying. So with that, please email in all your thoughts or stories or anything you want to tell us about, aliens, your contact with aliens, or seeing a UFO, anything on the alien subject. It's just a never-ending topic. So, of course, the email is paranormalxl@writeme.com. Thank you so much for listening. You are amazing, as always. And stay kind, stay humble, and remember, don't yuck someone else's yum.